So Squid Game, the massive deck game that began in 1988, has claimed a speculated 14,560 lives in total, and will continue to claim many more going forward unless it is stopped. But we of course have only ever gotten the privilege of seeing 470 of these deaths on screen, with 2 of the deaths actually being questionable to say the least. So before the new season drops in just a couple of weeks from now, I want to go through and remind and explain every death that we of course saw in the first season. So without wasting any more of your time, let's begin with the first on-screen death coming from player 324, in arguably the most popular Squid Game event of all time, the red light green light game. Player 324 made a bet with player 250 to be the first to make it to the other side, but by rushing and slightly stumbling he of course moved, which of course resulted in his death. Now player 250 wouldn't be far behind him. After he saw that 324 fell, he went over to gloat just a little bit, but then out of shock by his death, he ran for his life and was shot as a result, before he ever even had a chance of getting away. Now after being covered in player 250's blood, 306 began to scream and was shot as a result. This then of course made everyone else panic and run around desperately trying to get away. Now in this moment, a chunk of players were subsequently killed during the panic, but due to the mass hysteria and quick camera switches, many of these numbers are impossible to find out. So if I was actually able to grab any of them, you will see them on screen right here. But now following the panic, the game continues, with player 078 being the next to mess up and die, alongside a number that I just really can't make out as of right now. But then right after that, with sheer precision, player 305 was shot in the head as yet another result of him moving during the red light. With the same thing then sadly happening to players 362, 153, 056, 077, 126, 400 flat, 220, 114, 046, 112, 163, 041, and 289. But right then, as our MC gi-hun is about to fall and likely join the others in death, he is saved by my all-time favourite Squid Game character, Abdul Ali, or player 199. But then as they make it across the line and the timer finally ends, we of course see that several of the remaining players never made it across the line, which of course now meant that they would all be shot dead as a result of their failure. Now following this, we later see that one of the shot contestants actually managed to live, but the guards then nail his box shot and likely just sent it into the incinerator like the others. We are then later told by the guards that 245 players were subsequently killed during the red light green light game. They then allowed the remaining contestants to vote if they wanted to leave the game show, but inevitably even after being allowed to leave, a number of them actually returned later on. But during their time away, Jang Duk-soo, or player 101, stabbed and killed a former gangmate of his when that gang member arranged to have him jumped by a rival gang looking to collect on some sort of debt. Much later, however, as the guards are bringing the contestants back to the island, the police officer Hwang Jun-ho choked out guard 029 and threw him overboard into the ocean, where he of course subsequently drowned to death. Now it is then revealed that of the 201 that lived through the first game, only 187 actually returned to the island. That's around 93% of the total 201. Now much later, the remaining contestants of course went to the next game, which is arguably one of the hardest games of all time. It's the cookie game. Now this game of course needs no explanation, as I'm sure you've probably seen it somewhere online once before. But during the game we of course get to witness a total of 108 players die as a result of failing to solve the cookie. Of the 108, the players that we actually get to see die are players 369, 209, 061, 413, 182, 123, 338, and 058. We then of course move over and see that 215, 068, 446, 079, and 237 are all shot and killed as a result of failing their cookie as well. But we of course then witness that once the time runs out, all the remaining players were slaughtered like animals. But then sadly, just shortly after the square guard finally revealed his face, No Sang-hun, or player 119, shot himself in the head, as a realization that he was about to die no matter what. The unnamed male guard was then shot in the head by Hwang Hin-ho, aka the frontman, aka the man in the black mask. He was shot because of course he broke the rules of removing his mask in front of the other guards, something which is of course punishable by death. Now with that, it was later announced that a total of 79 players were eliminated from the cookie game, which of course now brings the remaining number of players in the running all the way down to a shocking 108. But shortly after returning, Jang Duk-soo, or player 101, beat player 271 to death over an egg. So now of course we only have 107 players remaining. But then as the lights go out, we of course witness as the strong murders the weak, with around 27 players in total being killed off during the nightly raids. During the raids, however, we actually get to see several of these murders actually take place. The numbers seen again are as follows: 198, killed for ratting on 101. 331, after trying to aid Se-byuk from being killed by 101, was then himself killed by 101 with multiple stabbings to the chest. 328 was then seen strangled to death by 224 using his own bedding. 074 was then beaten to death when she was screaming for help by the front door, and 103 was seen dead after the soldiers entered the room, along with 361 and 444. But then players 277, 074, 198, 087, 222, 301, 416, 006, 206, 233, and 239 were all reported dead over the intercom. So with that said, that's a total of 27 players who were eliminated just last night. We now have 80 players in total going into the next game of death, which is of course called Tug of War. In this game there are 8 teams of 10, which then must compete against one another to survive. The losing team of course dies, just like every other game prior to this, and the winning team of course just moves on to the next game. So of course going into this game it's expected that half the remaining contestants will die, but which ones of course were they? Well, in the first game we of course witnessed Team 1's team knock out Team 7's, which of course consisted of players 241, 327, 243, 027, 273, 058, 408, 037, 120, and 245. Now after that game finished, the second game would begin, with Team 4 going up against Team 5. Team 4 of course being our MC's team, which of course means Team 5's team, which consisted of players 314, 447, 396, 184, 315, 019, 194, 063, 019, and 156, all were killed as a result of losing. We then learned later that 20 members from 2 unknown teams were also killed off during the last game, which of course, like we said before, now leaves 20 players left. Now while sleep deprived and on lookout, we then see that gi-hun or player 456 has a flashback where we of course witness another person dying due to getting their head caved in during some sort of minor strike. Which of course is a minor moment, but it's a death that we've seen in season 1, so of course it has to be included in this video. Now next we of course see that an unnamed guard gets stabbed to death by Byung-gi or player 111 when he refuses to tell him exactly what the next game would be. We then see another unnamed guard get killed by the man in the black mask for once again removing his mask and for subsequently helping player 11 have an advantage in the games. We then see that the police officer also shot guard 028 in the head to maintain his cover as one of the other guards. Byung-gi or player 11 was then subsequently killed by an unnamed guard as a result of him killing the guard from earlier and for simply knowing too much about the games themselves ahead of time. Now the number of players remaining is of course 19, going into what of course will become one of the most heartbreaking games of all time, the marbles game. Now in this game you're forced to compete against your closest friend to claim all the marbles, but the one with no marbles left at the end of the game of course dies. Now of course the first number that we of course see lose everything and die is number 414, but he of course was followed shortly after by 002. We then see number 040 get shot in the head, before off in the distance we hear that both 068 and 229 have also died as a result of losing their games. We then see that after losing to 101, player 278 also dies, with player 043 being the next reported death, followed shortly after by 085, 276, 158, and 070. All of course were reported over the intercom. It's right then that we also get to see one of the saddest deaths of all time, the death of my favourite character Abdul Ali, or player 199, who of course died after being conned by someone he considered a dear friend, Cho Sang-woo. That's not all, it's just seconds later we of course get to see the beautiful and amazing Ji-young or player 240 getting shot in the head as a result of giving Se-byuk the win in the game of marbles. We then hear that player 001 has also been killed off as a result of losing to 456. But if you've of course seen the show before, then you know that isn't exactly how that whole situation actually went down. But now that of course marks the end of the marbles game. Now moving on, the next death that we of course see actually comes from player 069 himself, when he of course killed himself after beating and subsequently killing his wife in the previous game. The next game of death is another incredibly popular one. It's the glass bridge. Each player must now jump onto a piece of glass and see if it's the false one or not. If it isn't sturdy, they fall, and of course die. The first to fail and of course die in this game is of course 096, who actually decided to go first in this game of guessing. Next of course was 308, who went second. After her it was 062, then 021, and then 453. Followed shortly by 151, who was actually thrown off of his platform by 244, who was also then thrown off of his platform by 407. 407 then decided to actually guess himself, but actually guessed wrong and of course fell to his death. Now after 101 actually refused to move, Jungmin-tae or player 322 was pushed from behind by player 212. Now in a shocking turn of events, player 212 actually killed herself while holding on to player 101, living up to the promise they actually made about sticking together right to the very end. We then see player 017 get pushed from behind by Cho Sang-woo, which of course also marked the last death in the glass bridge game. Now moving on, there is a total of just 3 players remaining in the Squid game. Sometime later, however, we get another heartbreaking death from Se-byuk, who of course was stabbed to death by Cho Sang-woo off camera, now bringing that total of 3 players down to just the remaining 2, Cho Sang-woo and Sung gi-hun. But now of course, before we get to the 3 remaining deaths in the series, I'd first like to ask you all to consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. It helps us out a lot and I'd very much appreciate it. But now with that said, let's of course cover the final death in the Squid game, the death of Cho Sang-woo. Now Cho Sang-woo in the end of course decided to kill himself, rather than forfeit the prize money and leave with gi-hun. The reason for this was mostly selfish. He knew that leaving wasn't much of an option for him, because on the outside he of course has no remaining money to pay off his debts. He would just likely end up in jail or killed off by one of the many people he actually owes a lot of money to. And he of course knew that because of the kind of person that gi-hun actually is, he would take that prize money and of course use it to help Sang-woo's mother out, which is actually exactly what he did towards the end of the show. So yes, while his decision to kill himself was of course a selfish one, it was also honestly the only option he really had left to do. But now with that of course concludes the Squid game. But sadly there are still 2 more deaths left for us to talk about, with the first of course being the death of gi-hun's mother, who died shortly after he went back into the game, due to the complications around her diabetes illness. But then of course the second death actually came much later in that same episode from player 001, who we of course just found out was actually the host of the entire event. He died after meeting with gi-hun due to his cancer, a meeting where he of course explained why the event even happened and why he was actually involved in it. It wasn't anything truly redeemable for his character, but something that really did shock me in that moment when I first saw it for the very first time. But now with that does it for every death scene in Squid Game Season 1. If this video does okay, who knows, I might actually do one for Season 2 when that of course drops in the coming weeks. But for now, that's actually going to do it from me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed and have a great remaining day or night wherever you are, and peace.